Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ADI Colloquium series. My name is Min-kyo Koo. I'm a professor of the SNU GSPA, Graduate School of Public Administration. It is my great honor to have Professor Yang Yun-jung, who will be talking about the increasing climate-related disasters and challenges in community participation and action research in the era of COVID-19. Let me take a moment to briefly introduce Professor Yang. She is currently holding the position of Associate Dean, and she is also a Professor of International Development at the Graduate School of International and Area Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. She's been widely studying and researching on a variety of issues, especially in relation to the climate change and social development. She has published many articles and books, chapters, as well as policy memos. She earned her doctoral degree from University of Oxford, majoring in social policy. She also earned a master's degree in social policy and planning from LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science. And she has another master's degree in international studies from Ihwa Graduate School of International Studies. So, please, the table is yours.
Thank you, Professor Koo. It is very my honor to be invited to give this special talk on my research. And thank you for joining today's session. I understand that many of you probably are interested in development issues in general, because this is being hosted by ADI. But I didn't think that I would this long lecture, but that's great, because I tend to speak a lot when I'm speaking about things that I very care about. And I hope that you will enjoy my talk. And it's a bit long talks as a title, Increasing Climate-Related Disasters. Although Professor Koo introduced me as I'm an expert on climate change, I am not actually. I'm learning as well with a social policy background, and more like I'm giving like a sociological approach to what's going on in this context of climate change. And I'm especially interested in the community level intervention and participation by community people themselves. But as you can understand, I'm Korean, and I don't speak many other languages other than English and a little bit of French, but no local languages in Southeast Asia in particular, where my research is recently takes places. So I have to work with the local partners, and I'm going to talk about a lot of challenges, in fact, rather than what I found so far. And I'd like to just to share the current research perspective rather than solid findings or rigorous research findings. I hope that you will enjoy that, and especially in the era of COVID-19. As Professor Koo has already introduced a little bit of background of myself, I won't explain too much, but I just want to acknowledge this current research is being supported by the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Korea and the National Research Foundation of Korea. The contents of my talk will be like that. First, introduction. I'm going to briefly explain what social sustainable development should mean, but I'm sure that many of you are familiar with that. And increasing disasters in Asia within this climate change era, which is increasingly actually drawing our attention. I'm sure that, I don't really see many audience at the moment, so I trust that many of you are quite young and as students, maybe reading public administration or development or international studies. But I trust that also that especially young generation are very much interested in climate change, especially climate justice. because this is the era, and this is the context we are going to live in the coming future, and that will impact young generation more than older generation. I would say in the middle. And the second part, I'm going to talk about my past research project. Actually, this is the one that draw my attention. Actually, I was invited by the Korean Association, Korean Council of NGOs, and working closely with the Korean CSO or development NGOs, in working with the development context in turn. That I was asked to make a kind of evaluation of a few like related climate disaster reduction, risk reduction, or DRR in short, project. One of them was Korea Buddhist Foundation led project in the partnership with a share award in Myanmar. So this is the project, one of the projects that I was asked to review in a way, like in terms of the effectiveness of the project, in helping the local communities being in preparation or like in addressing the increasing disasters in the local context. So I'm gonna briefly share my experiences, what I found from the ground before COVID-19. What I emphasized before and breathe afterwards, or in the mid of COVID-19, is because the certainly, as you can imagine, that we are not, for example, I can't really visit at the moment the local context, which is huge difference in terms of research. I'm sure like some of you might doing it at the moment, or will be doing some local projects and development cooperation project in the context. Before, we used to visit, and we could go for, say, monitoring or evaluation, doing the survey, of course, along with the partnership with the local partners. But now, my ongoing actually research has been kind of delayed because of the COVID-19, because we are not allowed to be in person some under certain circumstances. So after the reason I share actually my previous experiences is because it's opened up a new field for me as well. So I'm also sharing my experiences. I'd like to encourage you to not to be shy away from the new project or new field, because especially in development is a multidimensional and multidisciplinary discipline, in fact, which requires all different, the combination, in fact, of the different aspects and different perspectives, sociology and politics, in oil, in even economics. And so you can find, as far as you can find, there's some area where you find very interested, and you think that's that merits to go further for examination or doing research about, then go for it. And climate change and disasters itself, it still is a new field to me, and I'm learning, and I'm really enjoying this process as an ongoing process. And that actually, the experience is the first project, not of my own, but like a research project of the development project, invited me to look for certain framework as well as indicators and measurement, what I can do about, because I was invited afterwards the project. I couldn't really change as much as I could. I would want. But afterwards it turns, it was like a more resilience. I mean, the concept, new concept of community resilience was something new. I thought I wanted to go further to get to know what it is about. And I'm going to talk about as a concept, as a framework, and would build back better. I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And the last part will be about my current research now in Cambodia. Why is that? And challenges I'm going to share about. But it's just at the beginning of the entire research process, which is about 3 weeks overall. Sorry, 3 years. What am I talking about? With a question mark, because I just maybe for Koreans or those who are in Korea, maybe very familiar with this expression of with COVID-19. It doesn't mean, but just a couple of days ago from the radio show, I got to understand that this may be misleading to English-speaking audiences. It doesn't mean that we want to live with the virus. I mean, I don't want to be infected by the virus but with COVID, meaning that in the context of COVID-19, we have to accept the reality that maybe COVID-19 may stay with us for a foreseeable long years to come, and it may become like one of regular influenza that we have to deal with. That's the expression with COVID-19. Okay, so I hope that if there is non-Korean audience, I hope you will understand that. This is why I put it question mark with in the parentheses. All right, let's begin with the Sustainable Development Goals. Very briefly, 18 goals we have, and we have, but rather than to go all in details, I'd like to present this in, say, 5 Ps. The people, we address people. MDG, Millennium Development Goals, the president of the SDGs, used to cover mostly like human development, like education and health and gender and etc. But we still have keep those people-related development goals in SDGs for the people's dignity in a way, not to have hunger and etc. But at the same time, we do have kind of, before MDG, most people used to think of development as an economic development, economic process or industrialization. And was through, during the 15 years under the MDGs, we used to pay more attention on human development side. But now with the SDG, prosperity, so economic development has returned in a way on the understanding that we can't really, do either way. We have to go together, human development, economic development, and the planet or environmental protection and caring of the planet, because humans and people should not be the governor or the controller of the planet. So here we including peace and partnership as well. So we have 5 Ps, which in fact are reflected in different goals, not necessarily mutually exclusive within 18 SDGs, now Sustainable Development Goals. And this is the infographic from Stockholm Resilience Center, which I love citing, simply because I believe that this is well captured how economy and society and SDGs should be understood within the biospheres as the largest spheres, rather than because it used to often former infographics in many documents, including UN reports, we used to present like a society, economy, and environment in 3 circles overlapping. However, I think this way, within the biospheres, we do have a human society, and economy is a part of that. that's, I believe this is the best kind of representation of how we should understand development. Okay, the two following graphs are from to Human Development Report 2020, last year, which captures a little bit of the impact of COVID, although not fully. But for those who might not be very familiar with, this Human Development Report has been published by the UNDP since 1990, and so over 20, and now it's becoming 30 years that they've published it annually with special themes. And last year, this particular graph shows that how a COVID-19 pandemic's shock would affect very negatively on human development issues, in fact, as you can see. And human development reports actually reports based on the Human Development Index and all different trends and different rankings of countries on human development perspectives, including education, health, and GNI as a proxy indicator for national income, and so to represent kind of the economy. So this one, very interesting from last year's report, which I would like to draw your attention, is that after 3 decades of the following up of the announcement of different countries, statutes, and rankings based on the human development, last year, the experts who wrote this report have now they are starting talking about different indicators we might need, because human development perspective doesn't really capture what we do about nature, about the planet, about the climate change, right? So what they present from this graph is that we do have a human development index value here between 0 and 1, and mostly it's quite closely related to the level of development, right? So this the circles refers to the individual country, and the size refers to the size of the population. So we can easily guess that this is India, this is China, this is perhaps like America, USA, right? So this as the economies is more advanced, they are likely to have pretty much correlations with the Human Development Index. But what they suggested recently is that we have to also take into account material footprint per capita. So, we all know that, well, most the current environmental issues have been caused by industrialization. So most advanced economies are responsible for kind of what we are facing in terms of climate change, in terms of say carbon dioxide emission, all this. This is why many developing countries are arguing common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR in short, for climate changes. So they seek, and many progressive scholars also argue that, like George Stiglitz just last week, I think, at the Asia Future Forum, he also mentioned about advanced economies should pay more to help, especially developing countries, to address the climate changes. Because as you can see, most, for example, many island, small island countries in the Pacific area, they are literally sinking because of the rising sea level by the climate change. They've done nothing, but most impact will be received and felt by mostly developing countries. So as you can see, footprints are higher on this side. So there must be doing something more. And I understand in 2 weeks' time, over 190 countries will be meeting in Scotland to check out the progress of the promise that we've made at Paris Agreement 2015, etc. So this kind of global efforts should, but they are usually we need kind of measurements. Here we are talking about human development, but now the author of this particular report are suggesting we need new indicator and indexes. That has been a great, I think, change and into the right direction if we want to do something more about climate change and etc. Okay, I'm taking too long, just an introduction. So let me fly a bit. This briefly shows that Asia in particular is the region that we might not only just we are from Asia, but also because the statistics actually reads that Asia is one of the regions, in fact, where most global disasters takes places, and also especially disaster deaths. The majority of disaster deaths were recorded in Asia, at least between 2015. And this is a more recent one from International Federation of Red Cross, IFRC. And this shows the different types of disasters triggered by natural hazards. As you can see, we have overall increasing disasters. And the disasters, most frequent disasters increasingly are climate and weather related. Although I have not bring like another detailed one, but the flooding is one with the highest frequencies, and which also causes a lot damages on the life as well as the economic side. So, but here I try not to say natural disasters, because no disasters are natural, and disasters can happen. We do have natural hazards, but the risk differs, and climate change is a crisis, and but it is not directly it's going to be a high risk or disaster. It depends where we are. For example, there will be certainly natural hazards, but it depends who are exposed to those hazards. I said Pacific small island countries are mostly exposed to those hazards, to rising sea, for example. But those who live on the higher level on the mountainside might not be. So that kind of exposure we have to take into account. But still, after this, we also have to take into account like our capacities or capabilities, as well as vulnerabilities. Of course, even developing contexts, although we tend to say like advanced economies or developing countries, still very, but they are not, as a whole homogeneous group. Within developing contexts as well, there are certainly wealthier families whose housing may be certainly stronger than non-haves. I mean, poor families their housing may be highly likely to be exposed to and vulnerable to, say, earthquake or flooding. But wealthier housings may stand at the light level of earthquake, for example. That kind of vulnerability. And how all this kind of this equation should be taken into account when we talk about risk. So then the solution, and maybe what we could do in terms of development cooperation, is that reduce vulnerability and increase capacity, right? That's what we have to bear in mind when we address any development projects. This is why like most development projects are being taking place in most vulnerable contexts with most vulnerable and perhaps discriminated people, and etc. And most income poor, but not necessarily income only. We have to also think about multidimensionality of development. So here, with increasing climate change and all this background explained, what kind of development are we trying to pursue? This is, the question then is that no longer whether disaster is a problem of development, because we've gone maybe too much industrialization, so it's carbon dioxide emissions usually out of a factory and air pollution, all this. Or disaster is a problem for development because of the disasters when a big storm and a flood washes all what we've built. Then usually we are left without hope, etc. But this is no longer an appropriate question to ask, according to Michizuki and her colleagues. And what we have to now ask, what kind of development should be, is about what we can do, taking into account and the climate change, for example, or all this natural environmental changes be considered as a part of our normal life, perhaps. And then what can we make the most of pre-disaster? So we have to make ourselves prepared. If we can reduce the risk, that would be even better. And post-disaster, what could we learn from the disaster? So we have to take the potential disasters as part of equation in a way. So having said this,